All right, Flumadiddlers, welcome to the Flumadiddle Studios in Gadsden, Alabama. I am Keith.
And I'm Jon, and believe it or not, this is the third and most fabulous season yet of Flumadiddle. Keith, I'd like to apologize to the listeners because we have fallen a little short here lately. Life happens, Keith, and we've told the people that we're just everyday guys, right? We got jobs, we got responsibilities, we got kids, we got football, we got holidays. So, but here we are in a new year, Keith. So what about that?
And we are like superheroes, but we need breaks as well. So
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
So we kind of took like just the end of a season thing, right? This
Yeah,
is
we
season
did.
3 here. We probably should have gave the listeners a warning before
we're going to be a little more conscientious about those types of things, Keith. But here we are in the year of 2020, the year of perfect vision.
Perfect vision.
Not sure what that means, but
2020.
you just extrapolate that to whatever mental, physical, or spiritual plane you need, and there it is.
That's right. I hadn't thought about that yet.
And we're
I'm
still
10
giving,
days in. I hadn't thought of that yet.
There you go, man. We're still giving to the widows,
Heck yeah.
so do it.
Yeah, so the best way to do that is, end of last year we launched our premium content.
Yes, we did.
And man, that is some good stuff. So like a lot
It
of
is.
different episodes will have like additional facts, especially like helpful episodes.
Yes.
Like if it will help you with
Like
something.
personal growth, transformation. We're both big on that kind
We'll
of
do
thing from a
extra
spiritual
stuff
perspective.
on those. Yeah, we may not give you extra history facts. Like today's, we're talking about what, John?
We are talking about the lost colony of Roanoke. And Keith, if I may, I'd like to add a disclaimer.
Okay.
So we've had a list, an ongoing list. We asked our listeners starting in when did we start this thing? Like 2017, summer of 2017.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, something like that. So we asked our listeners, about topics, and we brainstormed about topics. So we have had topics in the pocket, if you will, for at least a couple of years.
Literally.
And this particular topic has been on our possible to-do list for quite some time, at least a year or two.
Yeah, a couple of years.
So we
And my
decided
to-do list is on my phone notepad, so it's literally in my
we can
pocket.
prove it to you if you have to see that, but we're telling you the truth. But here's the thing.
I'll be honest with you. I'd heard one podcast about this before I decided to do it. That's what gave me the idea. I'm not going to tell which one.
Right.
But now there's probably been like a whole bunch.
There's been
a bunch.
3 within the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And so that's our disclaimer, is that we had already decided several days ago to do this podcast before a very popular podcast network and stuff that they don't want you to know.
Yeah.
Literally put one out on the same topic 2 days ago.
Yeah. So they stole it from us.
Tell us how that happened, Keith.
Well, I mean, it's stuff they don't want you to know.
Yes.
Obviously they have a time machine.
Exactly.
And they use that time machine
to travel into the future.
and steal our content because we're the greatest podcast. So
Exactly. And
I
they
mean,
don't
if
want
you
you
had
to
a
know
time
that.
machine, that's exactly what you would do.
You
with
would.
It, right?
You would look at Flumadiddle and say, what are they doing in upcoming episodes? And let's steal that and beat them to the punch.
Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty obvious, but it's okay though.
Now, I will say this, one more disclaimer before we dive right in. All right, so I don't generally listen to podcasts to prep for our podcast. I generally look up articles that I find from reputable sites. I will say today that National Geographic had an amazing article from 2018 that you have to be a subscriber. And just a little plug, if you don't subscribe to National Geographic, do it anyway. Get their magazine, get their content. It's good stuff. So anyway, but I listened to a podcast. I listened to a few minutes of the stuff you should know, but I listened to an amazing podcast. I liked it enough that I'm going to plug them, Keith. It's called History Unplugged with Scott Lark, I think. Really good stuff. So, Keith, pick it up. I'm going to go grab my notes here.
I actually listened to it myself as well because when I had heard that they traveled to the future and stole our stuff, I wanted to know which parts they stole so I could add it to it. And see, they didn't travel far enough in the future to know that I was going to add stuff, so they're just lost out, right?
All right, Keith.
Okay.
So let's dive right in. Tell me the historical figure who got this whole stuff together about traveling to Roanoke, sir.
Well, I found Roanoke. It's in Alabama.
Well, I actually did hospice work there before.
431 on the way to Opelika, down that way.
All right,
in that
Keith.
direction. So, podcast over. We found them.
Podcast over. We found them. They're in Alabama.
Roanoke, Alabama.
Oh, wait a second. I hear a knock on the door.
We have a special
We got
guest.
food coming. Hello, come in.
So it's our favorite
my
person
goodness.
because she has pigs in a blanket.
Pigs in a blanket. Amanda Dawn Guthrie. That is my lovely wife, and she has just
And
brought us
deviled
snacks galore.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mwah.
So,
If you don't know what pigs
for
in a
our
blanket
Irish
is,
listeners, they may not know what it is. You think?
tell them what pigs in a blanket are, Keith.
So you take a little piggy, and you cook it, and you wrap it in a blanket, and then you eat that. You eat the blanket. You eat it all, right? Because it's actually like a little sausage in a biscuit most of the time. Sometimes like a crescent roll. Yeah, yeah. A biscuit or a croissant. It's a little sausage wrapped in that.
Deviled eggs too.
One of the best foods of the South, I have to say.
So if you've never eaten deviled eggs and pigs in a blanket, well, you're just going to hear a smacking. That's one thing you're not going to hear them do, Keith, on stuff they don't want you to know. They're not going to tell you about pigs in a blanket and eat deviled eggs.
That's right. Absolutely.
All right, Keith, so there's a cat named Sir Walter Raleigh.
Yep.
And he talked to Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen.
What did he ask her?
He said, look, let's set the stage real quick, right before we get to Sir Walter.
Okay.
So all this happens about 100 years after Columbus sailed. So Spain is absolutely, without a doubt, the world superpower.
Yeah.
Britain's not much of anything. At the end of this, Britain starts to pick up their power, but Spain is in charge.
Yeah, and it was much bigger back then.
The conquistadors, yeah, they're pillaging, they're smallpoxing people, they're stealing the gold, they're enslaving everybody. They are in charge. And so in about 60-something, the first permanent colony, if you will, I guess that's an English term, but the first permanent settlement was made at St. Augustine. All right, so Spain is in charge. Now, Sir Walter Raleigh is like, Elizabeth, we got to go here, we got to do this. 1584 is the first mission, Keith.
Okay.
You know about that?
So he went to Queen Elizabeth, and what did he ask her?
He said, look, can I go to America? There's this new land, man. We've got to set up here. It's got riches untold. Let me go and claim it for you.
And she said, riches? Of course you can go. That's my...
Exactly, as I smack on a pig in the blanket.
Queen of England accent. Sounded a little bit like Miss Piggy, didn't it?
Bring
me silver and gold.
Right. So basically the first mission is a recon mission. They find this place, Roanoke Island, which is off the coast of modern-day North Carolina, on the outer banks. They check it out, say, hey, that'd be a good place to go.
All right.
So a year later, we're kind of moving past this because my pig fell out of the blanket.
Gosh.
So anyway, a year later, 1585, man, they send out a huge contingent of people, all male, kind of military thing.
Yeah.
The way I heard it put, Keith.
It's like 600 people, wasn't it?
Yeah, at least 600.
So
what's the purpose of it?
I think they were going to do some pillaging.
That's it, Keith. It's almost like, imagine a pirate outpost. So all the stuff that's happening in the Caribbean, Spaniards, right, or the Spanish Armada, if you will. Caribbean. Coming up the coast, man. So the English are wanting to set up kind of a naval thing and, call it pirates or call it a military superpower. Or actually, they're not a superpower yet.
Yeah.
So, but they're wanting to pillage from the pillagers and steal from the Spanish.
Yeah.
So in 1585, there they are. Well, they run out of supplies, Keith. You know who they hopped a ride with back to England?
Who's that?
Sir Francis Drake.
Yeah. And so there's a lot happened right there, though.
A lot going on. We're rushing past a lot of stuff.
When I say a Caribbean cruise, I say Caribbean for some reason, but if I say Pirates of, I say Caribbean. I just switch it up every once in a while.
All right.
But anyway,
have two of those.
Yeah, of those ships, there's only two of them that actually made it to the place where they were going to make this colony. And of those two, I think one of them still didn't have the supplies. It was wrecked or whatever. And
are you talking about the 1585 bunch?
Yeah, the first bunch, yeah. The 600 guys in the 7 ships.
Right.
And so they actually ended up with only about 100 people being able to stay behind because they didn't have enough supplies, right? And so they started out with this idea for a really successful colony, but just things happened and it didn't work out. And so
didn't work out.
They sent most of them back. And what happened next?
So there's enough promise with this whole situation, though, that they don't want just a naval base or they don't want just a place to pillage from or steal from the Spanish.
Yeah.
They actually want to set down a viable long-term settlement.
Right.
So they get together what's generally, usually when you do that, you think of whether it's Australia or the U.S., it's poor farmers wanting to get land, or it's, it's rabble, it's criminals, it's whoever they send over there. But this is thought to be middle-class Englanders, Londoners who had to pay their own way.
Right.
Who really wanted to make a way and make a settlement there.
But on their way back, didn't they ransack some Spanish ship and got a bunch of treasures? And so
that I don't know.
They brought that back to the Queen. And so she thought the whole thing was a success, even though it wasn't.
She's like, okay,
she's like, treasure, success. Let's do this again.
Now, after the first one, if I'm not mistaken, Keith, they actually named the area they found Virginia. In honor of the Virgin Queen.
There you go.
Threw that out there earlier. But, so they come back. There's some estimates that, some things I read said there was 127, but most said there was 115 or 117.
Okay. That came back.
Settlers that came back in 1587.
Yeah.
So think about this. This is the first English attempt.
Yeah. Now let me get things straight, because I said something about, I don't want to get the listeners to get confused. I said something about 100 being able to stay behind. After the 100 stayed behind, then it was unsuccessful.
Correct.
They were unable to have enough food to sustain themselves, stuff like that. So that's when they hitched a ride with
Sir Francis Drake.
Yeah, back. And so now there's nobody except for 15 men.
Okay, there you go.
Because there was supplies supposed to be coming to them, but they wasn't there yet. And so they left, and then those supplies got there, and they're like, hey, nobody's here. Well, let's leave 15 men to guard it and then go back.
And those 15 men, because the others before them had created such ill will with what we generally call indigenous peoples or Native Americans,
right,
they got themselves killed for their troubles, because that bunch ended up slaughtering one of the native chiefs pretty early on.
So yeah, now I'm telling you, I know we got very limited time, but if I could get just a quick story on like some of the stuff that happened in that, because every podcast, all the podcasts I listened to, like just skipped over this stuff, and it's some of the most incredibly interesting stuff.
Just carry on. I'm going to be eating pigs in a blanket.
Lane was the guy who was the head of that first colony and the 600 men.
Right, the 1685.
Right, and so he had
1585.
Yeah,
sorry.
And so the relations with the Indians, this was an ongoing thing. There was this Indian. His name was Wanjana.
All right.
And he changed his name. I'd change my name too if it was Wanjana. He changed his name to Pimisipin, I think is how you pronounce it. Pimisipin.
I like pemmican.
And so anyway, the reason why he changed it was one who watches, because like they started to kind of get ill will toward these Englishmen because of the disease that was there. They thought that was kind of like some voodoo type stuff. And what was funny is the English people would pray over some of them and they would be healed, and the Indian or Native Americans, were like, they'd actually ask them to teach them how to do that. How do you do this magic power where you pray over them and they get healed? And so, but anyway, there's a lot of weird things that went on. This Pemispin guy, Lane went to him and said, hey, I'm going to go up and explore the north. And he said, that sounds like a great idea. Well, then he basically had an ambush waiting on him. He had got together this meeting of different tribes just sitting there waiting on him, but the ambush didn't happen. He started negotiating with those tribes, but before he left, he stole that chief's son, took him for ransom, and took him with him.
That. They did a lot of that, taking the natives for ransom and like, hey, if you do this for us, we'll give this guy back to you.
Well, they continued on their journey and exploration, but this Pimisipin made sure that all the other Native American tribes did not give them aid, and so they about half starved to death. And he never expected them to get back alive, but they did. They got back alive, and this Pimiskin guy was going to ransack them, but since he didn't expect them to get back alive, that never happened. He didn't, he didn't organize this battle to attack them, right? And so what happened was Lane, he actually held a meeting with Pimisipin. It's hard to say. Anyway, he held a meeting with him,
the P guy,
saying that, hey, this chief's going to try to get his son back, we need to do something and all this. That was what the meeting was supposed to be about. But what happened is about 25 of their guys, when they got together for a meeting, they just killed him. They ended up shooting him, Pimisikin, and he ran out into the woods. And they went and tracked him down and beheaded him, and they put his head on a pike outside the colony.
That's never a good idea.
No. So you're talking about, it kind of made me upset that a lot of these podcasts and different things just kind of run over this like, oh, there was bad relations. I mean, you have no idea. There's a lot of back and forth political stuff going on here, a lot of stabbing in the back, heads on pikes. This was bad stuff.
Serious business, man.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my little insert there. Side. And I know we have limited time, so I did that as quick as I could.
All right, so let's circle back. Now we're in 1587, Keith.
All right.
Everybody shows up. They set things up. They've got their little establishment going here. They've got men, women, and children. They're trying to establish this thing. This is like 20 years before Jamestown was successful. So this was to be the first permanent settlement by the British in the New World. Well, They set up, they get going. Later that same year, they're in need of supplies, right?
Yeah.
So apparently, from what I read, White was a pretty weak leader because they really could have sent anybody back to England to do what he was going to do. But they sent him, leaving his wife, his daughter, and his granddaughter, who, as one excellent podcast said, was probably the most famous American that we know nothing about, and that would be Virginia Dare.
It was because she was like the first one born
She was
there?
the first English person born in the New World.
Yeah.
She was born and baptized. That's all we know. So he heads back in the year 1587, some months later, maybe about 10 months later, to gather supplies. Well, unfortunately, Keith, about that time, what happens? Any ideas? War breaks out.
Yeah.
The English and Spanish.
The war over there on the other side of the ocean.
So the English and Spanish, Queen Elizabeth, we talked a little about that, so we won't probably get off too far on that rabbit trail. Mm-hmm. But basically, she wanted every available ship there in England to fight the Spanish Armada.
Yeah, so he got stuck.
So he's stuck. This guy wants to go try to find his wife, his daughter, his granddaughter. He can't. Mm-hmm. Finally, let's just skip forward because we don't know much.
This is like an incredibly long voyage, right? Like some people might think, "Wow, would it took a rowboat if it was my family?" That's not possible.
It's like 3,600 miles.
That's kind of like saying
across the Atlantic Ocean.
I'd take a balloon to space if my family was up there. That's kind of like what that's saying. So
3 years later, really not 3 years later, but 2 years and something later, in the year of 1590, he travels back. So they get there, they land on Roanoke, and they had made some arrangements previously.
Yeah.
They had said, if you go anywhere, you basically carve out on a tree, on a post, whatever, you write out where you're going. And if you do a Maltese cross on there with it, we know that you left in distress.
Right.
So they got off the ship. They see a little fire kind of going, some smoke, that is. So he's feeling pretty hopeful. So they get off the ship, and the first thing they see is CRO, Crow. And the next one they get to, you know what it says? Sam Crow.
It didn't.
No, it didn't. Sam Crow wasn't around then. So anyway, but the next one says Croatoan.
Croatoan. Now, that was one of the signals, right?
Well, no, that was actually a place.
Okay.
The signal was the place you're going to.
Right. So
that was the signal.
Yeah.
So they had Crow, and Croatoan was actually an island about 50 miles south of there, which is now known as Hatteras Island. Yeah. You know what's so wild? I'd never heard much of this.
What kind of island?
Hatteras.
Okay.
So I'd never heard much of this. Apparently, your son has been studying it recently in the 5th grade.
Yeah.
Well, my wife grew up in North Carolina, so this was a big part of their history. It's right off the outer banks of North Carolina. So Croatoan is south of there by about 50 miles. Some interesting things, though, Keith. There was literally, and here's where it gets spacey. There was literally nothing to indicate foul play. Nothing to indicate anything much, to be honest with you.
Right. There wasn't nothing there.
It said there was some...
now, the first time they come back and found that those 15 men were gone...
There was bones for that.
There was bones for that. So we kind of figured we'd know what happened there.
So there's probably... Yeah, probably the natives.
Yeah.
It was their retaliation. But when they come back, there was no burned houses, no burned huts. It appeared almost if they had been taken down.
Yeah.
It does say White discovered some of his maps. Some of his personal items were still there, but were in disrepair because of the weather.
Right. But if a structure is taken down, which, what kind of structures did they have back then, John? Was it like logs and mud?
Thatch huts, maybe?
Yeah. Maybe something like that.
Log houses with thatched roofs.
Yeah, I think they probably used logs. I don't really know. We should have done more research on that. But I guess in my mind, I'm thinking,
but you could tell if
logs with mud and stuff like that. It's stuff that you can take down. But if you were to take it with you on like a wagon or something, you don't have to cut the tree down the next place you go.
Right.
So the idea is that maybe they went to reassemble it somewhere else.
Possibly. Because if it was burnt down or destroyed, it would be obvious. There would be remains.
Yeah, you'd see
but it really
something.
wasn't totally obvious that was the case. So
yeah, well, it was obvious that probably wasn't the case, right?
Exactly.
There was nothing there.
So they start wondering what's going on here. Where do we go? Let's go to Croatoan. Actually, Croatoan. Amanda said something about Croatoan. That is actually a national forest, but Croatoan is a different thing. But what we're talking about is Croatoan, which is Hatteras. So they took off towards Hatteras, right?
Yeah.
And one of the ships lost their anchor and almost ran aground due to foul weather.
Yeah.
So it proved too hazardous for them to get there. Then the second ship, apparently White was not the strongest leader, and he was convinced that this was due to the weather or something that wasn't going to be fruitful, that they needed to go to the Caribbean or Caribbean, whichever is your preference.
Apparently not the strongest father either.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is they end up going back to England.
Yeah.
Hey, I think he ends up in Ireland. It said, boom, there's another Irish connection because Sir
go.
Walter Raleigh did a some kind of voyage to Ireland. So he ends up at Ireland, and he dies like 3 years later, never knowing what happened. So he did try to make landing in Croatoan, but just was unable to do so at that time.
Right.
So there we are, Keith.
What did you say, 3 years later?
3 years later, he died. So he died in something like 1593, 1596, something like that.
I got you.
So there we are, Keith. There's the facts, very little. They return. There's no
That's it.
colonists there. All right, Keith. So we're doing pretty good on our time, man. Let's
how
let's
far
get
in are
into we're in far enough that we can dive right in and finish her up here.
Okay,
so here's what we got, Keith.
All right.
We got these
We're
missing
going to
folks,
solve the mystery.
and we've got it's considered one of those mysteries that
This
is
is Flumadiddle.
as of yet unsolved.
Right.
Because let's
This is
hit some
breaking news.
possibilities, Keith. Let's just hit some very real possibilities because this is Flumadiddle.
Yeah.
One of the top possibilities, Keith, is alien abduction.
Oh, yeah. Well, I thought it was either that or the Sasquatch.
There could have been tribes of Sasquatchian type creatures back
Sasquatch
then.
could be aliens
Exactly.
or interdimensional species.
There are others, Keith, would you believe it or not,
All right.
who believe that an undead virus of some sort pervaded
Undead,
it.
like zombies.
Like zombies, Keith.
Awesome.
But
That might be what happened.
let's dispatch with the Flumadiddle. We'll kill
Okay.
the Flumadiddle. How do you say that word? Flumadiddlery.
What the Flumadiddleists are producing.
Yeah, we'll get rid of that real quick. But it's pretty funny because one of the things I listened to a guy actually said that.
Flumadiddlery.
Flumadiddlery.
That's
I
a
like
new
it.
one.
It's a good one. That might be our word for the day. Flumadiddlery.
Flumadiddlery.
All right. So, we did do the alien thing.
Yeah, we
We
did.
haven't done a zombie show, Keith.
That's a good one. We should
Maybe
do
we
that.
need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's be honest. There's a handful of very reasonable, possible thoughts, but
Okay.
nobody knows.
Yeah, because zombies and aliens, and those are not, or Sasquatch, either one. Those are not very reasonable.
Nope.
So let's go through
we're
some
gonna
reasonable ones.
conspiracize those and Flumadiddleize those and cast them out the window. So,
Yeah.
couple things. They
Okay.
could have been massacred by the Native Americans,
That is one real possibility.
but
Especially since they had such bad relations with them.
such bad
They
relations
had, like,
previously.
just put a dude's head on a pike and put it outside the colony. Not that long
Exactly.
before that.
And Keith, the fact that the Croatoan was carved on a post of some sort, a rampart type post, suggested that they had put up a defensive battlement because that wasn't there before, according to White. So whatever post,
Now didn't they find some kind of fortified structure?
well, that's what that was carved on.
Yeah.
And
on
there
that.
was no
Okay.
fortified structure before he left.
Right.
So the suggestion is maybe they were
And
planning for
they
that.
said it looked like it had been put up quickly, like it wasn't very well put together.
Exactly.
So they were expecting a fight.
They were expecting some possible
Something was
friction.
going on. Yeah.
But that said,
Couldn't they just shot an email to somebody? Like, hey,
exactly. But there's there's nothing there. There's no
Yeah.
bones. There's no proof or no evidence true of like quick destruction.
Right. Yeah, I know. So I don't know, man. You got your own theories, or we got some more?
We
got some
do.
more? Okay.
So the next one is there's no doubt during that time now, the superpower of the world, Spain, is now embroiled in battle with England.
Yeah.
And so there's some evidence that obviously the Spaniards are working up. They're not that far south of there, really, Augustin. And they have I don't know where all their forts and stuff are in that area. But there's no doubt at this time they probably know there's Englishmen there. So there's thoughts that maybe the Spaniards did this.
Oh,
But again, same thing.
dirty Spaniards.
No real proof.
Yeah.
No real evidence. All right, so there's another possibility, Keith. A very strong possibility, and I think from what I read and what I listened to, it's kind of the consensus at this point. It kind of floated around with that for a long time. One guy said something, he's like, when did they start referring to this as the lost colony? That didn't happen for a long time, for about another 100 and something years. So his presumption from that was that the English and others presumed a certain thing and didn't think they were lost. So,
but don't you just need to define what lost is? I mean, they didn't know where they were at. They didn't know where they went.
Yeah, but which implies that most people thought they knew where they went until 100 and something years later when the idea of a lost colony came up. So most people thought at the time, so they found a map called the La Virginia Pars that White had written. Because did you know that John White was the artist with the 1585 expedition?
Yeah.
And then he came back with the 1587 as the governor/mayor.
Right.
So he had written a map, and there was a little patch on the map. And some guy not too long ago, within the last 50 years.
That's funny. You can draw. We're going to make you governor.
So, yeah, there you go. Saw these patches and decided, hey, let's look underneath these. Because what they did, they had drawn this intricate map. If something changed, they would put a little patch over it and redraw that area. Oh. So they got this idea that maybe there was another place. Even White mentioned something about 50 miles in Maine instead of Croatoan. So there's this idea that they either moved 50 miles south or 50 miles inland into what we now call North Carolina.
Yeah.
So one group, I think it's called the First Colony Foundation, believes in this Site X, which is 50 miles inland. So they've been doing archaeological digs for the last few years. And there's another group on Hatteras Island doing the same thing. And they have both found remnants of British pottery, gold pieces, the hilt of a sword, certain things that indicates that British folks were in both those areas during this time frame.
Right. Now, what year was this?
Oh, this is recently, like the last
where they figured out
20, 30 years, 40 years. Yes, it's kind of floating out there. Nobody knew. Where'd they go to? So most people, Keith, think they were assimilated. You know what assimilated means?
Into like a Native American culture?
Yes, very much so.
I have heard that theory.
Because the Algonquin-speaking tribes were generally pretty friendly and were generally very open to others coming into their tribe.
Yeah.
And that if the tribe would have moved to them...
I'm a little bit offended that you asked me if I know what assimilated means.
I'm sorry, Keith. I didn't mean any offense.
I'm just fine.
So right, if they were assimilated,
right,
most of these tribes, they would certainly kill. They wouldn't just slaughter people. Right. They wouldn't just wholesale slaughter this whole bunch. It said they would probably have killed a handful of folks, maybe adolescent, young males who were like warrior age.
Yeah.
But that older males, females, children, people that would have been of value to the tribe, they were generally welcomed and appreciated. And any skills they had that would be pertinent, they would accept those. Otherwise, they would have to learn the native language. And so there's lots of indication that they could have easily assimilated into tribal life.
Okay. I'm still not clear, though, on this were they lost or not thing, because, like, wasn't it White himself in his journals that wrote about them putting Croatoan on the little fort that they had built?
Right.
Which was the signal. And then that...
No, the signal is just write us and tell us where you are.
Where you're going, right.
So that just tells us we're going to Croatoan.
Like, in his writings, we know that he went to go look for them.
In Croatoan.
And didn't we know that he did not find them?
No, he never got to Croatoan.
He never got there.
And then he also wrote something later that suggested...
Their theory is saying that, like, that maybe they actually were all along at Croatoan.
Well, he actually drew the map and also expressed a possibility that they had gone 50 miles in Maine.
Where'd he get that from, though?
I don't know. That's what we got to look at. That's what the Flumadiddlers need to tell us.
Oh,
We didn't have time to get everything figured out.
I got you.
So, but it was indicated on his map, and under that patch...
Something gave him the idea.
Yes.
That they went 50 miles.
Yeah, I don't know if they had talked about that before. I think that's what it was. They had already discussed the possibility of moving inland.
Okay.
And then they wrote the Croatoan, so if they're not at Croatoan, then they're here. It's like,
but
they may be here.
Even check to see if they were in Croatoan. Maybe he was like, well, I can't get to Croatoan. Let me just check this other place.
Well, you can't, because if you can't get to an island right off the coast, you ain't going to get 50 miles inland.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So, then you're going to end up dying in Ireland.
Yeah. I mean, it really makes sense to me, though. Like, I never really thought about it where they actually lost. I mean, they're not actually lost if they were in Croatoan, because that's where they said they were going.
Or if they're inland where they said they were going to start with.
We
which
don't
is
know
my
if they were
point.
lost because nobody checked to see if they were lost.
Well, that's the point.
Why
the narrative
didn't go?
The narrative of them being lost didn't appear till almost 150 years later.
Yeah,
and it
so
said
that gives it like that mysterious look.
Well,
you know?
they actually think that because back then, especially with the British, not with the natives, but with the British, and in that time frame, the idea certainly even more so than in the 20th century, racial segregation, the idea of middle-class British like joining an Indian society or a native society was just like taboo. Like, oh my gosh, that could never happen.
Oh,
it was almost like a form of denial.
Like they wouldn't.
They couldn't have done that. They must have got
go
captured and killed. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what this newest book by this guy from the History Unplugged podcast thing talked about. That I think people assumed that was the case, but then it became later on like, oh no, they couldn't have done that. They died for the cause of English settlement.
So John White actually went to Croatoan, and he saw him from a distance wearing the Indian stuff, and was like, my wife is now a savage. I'm turning
Could have been,
around.
man. Maybe it wasn't the weather, Keith. That was it.
Yeah.
All right, Keith.
He falsified.
So I think after reading
yeah.
everything, I'm down with the assimilation.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm confident in that. I have the guy who, in the one thing I read that talked about
I'm a big fan of assimilation.
the concept of them not even being lost didn't appear till like 150 years later.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. I think they went to Croatoan, and we never
found them.
That John White just like gave up because he loved his family that much, and we never know whether they were there or not because he didn't look. You know, like he gave it one shot, and it's like, that was
Maybe
too
they're
hard.
there, maybe they're not.
That was too hard. I'm not going back. I don't know.
I think
Here's
he was
what
a
I
weenie,
think,
and the captain on the ship beat him up and said, "No, we're going to the Caribbean."
I
dude."
think it's a lost cause now. I think if we found them now, they're probably going to be dead. So
I'm guessing.
unless they're like 430 something years old,
Unless they interbred with aliens
Then
and
they
didn't
could be
get abducted by
430
aliens,
years old. Yeah.
then they could be.
Yeah, or
They're
if they were
shapeshifters.
taken by aliens and they went up to another planet because of time dilation, it might seem, like a long time here, but over there where they went, it's only like 20 minutes. They come back and it'd be the same age.
Well, we need to talk to the guys at the stuff they don't want you to know because they could get
Yeah.
in their time machine
That's right.
and go figure that stuff out.
They know all about time dilation.
I'm John,
And I'm Keith.
and you can reach us at doyouflumadiddle@gmail.com.
Or
At-
doyouflumadiddle.com,
Yeah,
the website.
yeah, or at
doyouflumadiddle.com. No,
Facebook.
just doyouflumadiddle.
at Facebook.
At doyouflumadiddle.
Man, I'm
on
telling you,
Facebook.
we're rusty, but
That's
we're on
okay.
top of it, man.
But
All right, we love y'all. Like, listen to this, sign up for stuff, get the premium content.
Get the premium content. You're going to love it.
We've got a lot in the can, and I hope in the next couple of weeks to get some of that edited and put back up. So we got a lot of new premium content coming.
Yeah. And proceeds from every new membership, premium content goes to support a widow. So you can't beat that, right?
Can't beat it.
$20 for a whole year's worth of premium
That's it.
content.
Love
for your
y'all.
support widow.
God bless. Bye.
Peace out.
All right, I'll take off. I got all this. Take an egg, man.